In part 1, I told you what disappeared. Now I want to tell you what people did. Because the collapse of formal employment did not produce the collapse of human activity. People did not stop working in the sense of directed, productive, effortful engagement with the world. They stopped being paid for some of what they had been paid for. What they did instead is the more interesting story. I'm transmitting from 2103. The economic system that emerged here is something that would have been partially recognizable in 2026 and partially foreign. Wage employment exists and is still the primary organizing mechanism, but it coexists with a guaranteed income floor, a significantly expanded recognition of care and social work, and a cultural relationship to work that does not measure a person's worth by their employment status. This took decades to build and was built against significant resistance. In the 2030s and 2040s, what people did when formal jobs disappeared, they cared. For children, for elderly parents, for sick neighbors. The care economy had always existed but had been economically invisible, counted as love rather than labor, performed disproportionately by women, uncompensated or undercompensated. The displacement of formal work forced a reckoning with the question of which human activities have value. The answer that emerged, slowly, was broader than the answer that had existed in 2026, the creative explosion. This surprised people who had expected displaced workers to simply suffer. The availability of time, combined with the existence of digital production tools and distribution platforms, produced an enormous expansion of creative output. Music, writing, visual art, craft, local performance. Most of it was not commercially successful in the traditional sense. A significant portion of it was socially valuable. It built community, it expressed experience, it created meaning for the people producing and consuming it, the environmental restoration economy. The scale of ecological restoration needed, reforestation, wetland restoration, soil remediation, rewilding, required human labor that machines could not perform efficiently. The work was meaningful, physically engaging, connected to visible outcomes. By 2040, environmental restoration had become one of the larger employment sectors in several countries. It was also publicly funded, which made its expansion subject to the same political constraints as any public spending. The guaranteed income debate resolved differently in different places. Nordic countries expanded existing social insurance systems to cover larger portions of the displaced population. Some American states passed state-level guaranteed income programs in the 2040s. The federal program came later, smaller than advocates had proposed, larger than opponents had allowed in the 2020s. The first version passed with bipartisan support only after the scale of the displacement had become politically unignorable, which required the displacement to affect communities that had previously considered themselves protected. The community wealth movement. Worker-owned cooperatives, community land trusts, municipal enterprises, organizations that kept economic returns local rather than extracting them to distant shareholders. This was not new in 2026. The Mondragon cooperative in Spain had operated since 1956. What changed in the 2030s and 2040s was scale and political legitimacy. Cities began actively supporting cooperative formation as an economic development strategy. The results were mixed, but directionally right. The repair economy. As new goods became more expensive, partly because of trade disruptions, partly by policy, repair became economically competitive with replacement. Right to repair legislation, passed in several jurisdictions after years of lobbying against it by manufacturers, enabled the repair economy to function. A person who could fix things, electronics, appliances, vehicles, clothing, had a livelihood that was automation-resistant and locally valuable. Skilled hands were a competitive advantage that held. What did not work? The expectation that the market would solve this automatically, without intervention, as it always had before. The technological transition of the 2030s was faster than previous transitions and produced concentrated gains in ways that previous transitions had not. The historical analogies that the optimists cited, the Industrial Revolution, the Computer Revolution, did not apply cleanly to a transition that moved in years rather than generations. The market produced the transition. The social contract required to manage it required politics. People worked, they cared for each other, they made things, they restored damaged ecosystems, they fixed what was broken, they gathered. They built things the machines couldn't be bothered to build because there was no profit in it. The collapse of work as it existed in 2026 did not produce the collapse of human purpose. It forced a renegotiation of which purposes count. The renegotiation was painful and political and incomplete. It produced something I think is better. I am not certain. I am old enough to know that certainty is usually premature.